Heather. All right. Hey y'all, I'm Heather Phillips. I'm going to be assuming the program chair position starting in January 2024 on the board for organizing these meetings, but Rick is not able to be here today. He normally would introduce our speaker, and so I'm filling in as I just continue to fill in on all the things he's done for this organization over the many decades that he's been doing this. So I'd love to introduce Tricia Kyzer. She's a naturalist writer, environmental educator. She has a BA in elementary education from North Greenville University and holds a statewide Master Naturalist certification as well as Palmetto Environmental Educator certification. For the past 20 years, Tricia has worked with people of all ages, leading them into making their own connections to our wild places, from wilderness therapy curriculum development to nature-based organizations. She works part-time with the SC Aquarium as a educational leadership partner and with Jocassee Lake Tours as a naturalist guide and educator. She spends her school year as a 4th, 5th grade teacher at Wild Oak Independent School, which is a nature-centered school in Hendersonville, North Carolina. She appreciates the never-ending wonder of the natural world and enjoys spending time outdoors, being curious and making new discoveries. And one of her bucket list life goals is to have the opportunity to name a lichen in the Jocassee Gorges. So without further ado, here's Tricia to talk about lichen. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the Native Plant Society having me, since botanists outnumber lichenologists by 1,000 to 1. And there's not that many botanists out there anymore. The field of botany is declining. So as you can imagine, the field of lichenology is very, very tiny. And my bucket life list goal of naming a lichen is a pretty ambitious goal on some hands, because getting a lichen to species, as you'll find out, is a very tricky thing to do. However, on another hand, it's a really easy goal to achieve because there's so many lichens that haven't been named, especially in places like the Jocassee Gorges. So thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate it. How do we move this? Okay, so first thing I want you to know is I am not an expert. I have a big desire to know about lichens. I think they're magical. I think they're wonderful, but I am not an expert. And as I said, it wouldn't be that hard because I don't have a lot of competition, but becoming an expert takes a lot of time and study. And I'm sure you've heard with all the things that I do, I don't have a whole lot of time to dig in deep, but if I could, I would for sure. So I'm going to show you what an expert looks like. This guy is an expert. I love this guy. His name is Kerry Knudsen, and he is one of the foremost experts on lichens in North America, probably in the world. He began his career in lichenology, though, in a very unexpected way. He was a construction worker, and he became injured and disabled and was no longer able to work in the construction field anymore. And he's like, what am I going to do with my life now? All I've ever done is construction. I don't have a college degree. Maybe plants. Plants sound interesting. So he digs into plants. And as he's digging into plants, he finds himself lured over into the world of fungi or lichens. And he decides, I'm going to study lichens. So he starts studying them. And this man, who has no degree, who worked in construction, has written 200 scientific papers on lichens, and he has named over 60 species of lichens. So what's so wonderful about lichens? What is it that draws us to know more about these? Well, they're tiny worlds. As a matter of fact, the more we learn about lichens, the more we find out that these tiny worlds might even be ecosystems, these little miniature ecosystems, and they're everywhere in the whole world, every continent, and they're just trailside. As we're looking at plants, as we're looking at trees, there's these little tufts of lichen all over that have an entire universe happening within them. Ooh. They're architectural. They have so much beauty. They have turrets and towers and foliage. So the structure of them is just absolutely beautiful. They're landscapes. There's peaks and valleys. One thing I apologize that I forgot to bring with me, because I did bring some lichens for you to look at, is loops. Because you get a loop and you really start looking into those tiny worlds, and you start to see that they have entire landscapes to them. As you start to get lost in the landscape, you feel like you are inside of a coral reef or maybe even a miniature mountain landscape. They're otherworldly. So these things that come along with lichens, these parts and these pieces that I'm going to throw out a whole bunch of new words maybe for some of you and names for, these look like they were created by an artist, or they were created by somebody's imagination. They don't even look real when you start looking closer at them. And their names. This is why I didn't want the lights all the way off. Let me read you a few. Now, lichens are named by their fungal partner. So their scientific names are based on a fungal name. However, their common names, which have not been dispersed so widely as plants' common names, will definitely have you laughing. And this is one of my favorite field guides. This is recently produced. It's a field guide to the Smoky Mountains. And the gentleman who wrote this had a sense of humor, as he added to the hilarious list of common names his own twist on them. So we have names like square britches. You may have heard of square britches as a common lichen name, or stubby square britches, or surprise square britches. He's named one chocolate balls, one shrew poo. There's Elizabeth's eyeshadow, the intricate and the sophisticated. We have mealy bug lichen, close encounter lichen, decorated and distinguished lichen, anothery, British soldiers. I'm sure you've heard that one before. The rugged traveler lichen, clear and cold and tawny and brawny. Basically, if you get to name a lichen after the scientific name, you get to have a lot of fun with the common name. So that's a great reason to study lichens. They fluoresce. Lichens are fluorescent. So this is a really cool property that comes out of the secondary metabolites that are housed inside of lichens. Lichens have over 600 secondary metabolites, which these metabolites help them protect them from sunlight, help them defend themselves against predators. Some of the metabolites in lichens, actually many of the metabolites in lichens, are found nowhere else in nature. Nowhere else, only in lichens. And I'll tell you a little bit more about those metabolites in a minute. One of my favorite reasons that I like to study lichens is they're survivors. A lot of lichens are extremophiles. They live in places that nothing else could live. A rock surface like this could be up to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. How does any living organism survive, make food, produce life in a habitat like this? How do we have lichens in every single continent in the world? Except that they have established this really, really wonderful way of survival. And their way of survival has everything to do with community. So what is a lichen? I've told you it's not a plant. I've given you some hints. First, I'm going to tell you what it is not. Lichens are not plants. A lot of times you'll see lichens in similar areas to plants. All of the things that I'm going to tell you about that lichens are not do something that lichens don't exactly do. They make their own food. So a plant is able to make its own food. A plant has a vascular structure and roots. Lichens do not have a vascular structure or roots. Lichens are not mosses. So mosses, once again, they're non-vascular, non-flowering, but they're plants. Lichens are not liverworts. This is probably one of the ones that's most confused. A lot of people see mosses and they think they're lichens, but liverworts especially look very similar to lichens. And just to make things really confusing, lichens can colonize liverworts. So there are lichens that do colonize liverworts, but this is a liverwort. This is a single-celled organism, non-vascular, but not a lichen. Lichens are not even a single organism. A plant is a single organism. Moss structure, single organism. Liverworts, single. Lichens are not even a single organism. I'm sure that you have all heard the very old saying that Freddie the fungus took a lichen to Alice the algae. Oh, but this is the 2000s and life is crazy and complicated now. So we have, instead of Freddie the fungus, we have Frankie the fungus. Takes a lichen to Alex the algae and Sid the cyanobacteria. And it's actually even more complicated than that because there are probably in almost every lichen 2 fungi. The ascomycete, which is the sac fungi, is still going to be the structure that you're looking at. But the basidiomycetes have they found yeast from them in many, many lichens. Some lichens, all lichens either have algae or cyanobacteria, some have both. So it's very complicated. When I say it's a mini ecosystem, like the structure itself is a mini ecosystem with lots of organisms living together. And without each other, they couldn't survive. Community creates this opportunity for life in some of the most unlikely places because there are so many different organisms, each providing a different thing to the structure they're able to survive. Although there is a saying that says that lichen is really a fungus that has taken to agriculture. So the fungus is farming the algae or the cyanobacteria. And when you look very closely under a very powerful microscope, what you will see is something that looks a little bit like enslavement. You'll see an algal ball surrounded by the structure of the fungi with tubes going into it, that the fungi is taking the food from the algae. And this algae that might have lived a day or two on its own now is living for hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years trapped in this structure. It's working though. Every lichen has to have a microbiome. So that's the fungal partner. And I'm going to show you 2 photos. The first photo is you're looking at the fungal structure right now. The algae is not, or the cyanobacteria is not activated. In order for that partner to activate, you need the right amount of moisture and the right amount of light. So one of the ways that lichens have survived in these extreme environments is they do have this ability for the algae to just turn off, for the whole organism, water to just be drawn out of it so that it doesn't freeze or burn. And then when the conditions are right, the organism takes a whole new look. Same organism, this is with the photobiont activated. So I keep with me, when I am going lichenizing, a spray bottle, because I'm going to take this spray bottle and I might spray it on a lichen that has the dried structure. And tonight afterwards, if you want to come look at these lichens, you're welcome to take the spray bottle and spray down some of my lichens and you'll start to activate those algal partners. So the same lichen side by side can look completely different once you get it wet and you activate the photobiont. Now this is where my teacher, 4th, 5th grade teacher self is going to come in. This, first of all, we have this wonderful picture of the structure. Once you understand the structure, this is super important to identifying lichens, is understanding how a lichen is built. You have a cortex on the top and the bottom, and that cortex is your fungal structure. You also have in the medulla, those are hyphae, so that's the fungal hyphae. And then up at the top where you see algal zone, that's where your algal partner is. So it is squished in there. And so I brought my Oreos with me. And this Oreo, this simulates what a typical foliose lichen would look like. You've got a cortex, hyphae, and then a small layer of algae or a photobiont trapped inside of there. I shouldn't use the word trapped. That's anthropomorphizing. But so how to identify lichens? Well, The good news is that if you are a lumper, you're going to love identifying lichens. If you're a splitter, it's going to drive you bananas because lichens are very, very difficult to identify. Remember Carrie Knudsen, who has named over 60 species and written 200 papers? He still cannot identify some lichens to species, many lichens to species. So identifying a lichen to species is very difficult and can take a lot of steps. There are a few that you can definitely identify to species, but most lichens you're going to identify to genus. And that's where you're going to stop and you're going to enjoy them. You're going to say, this is a beautiful Parmelia. This is a beautiful Peltigera. But the first thing you need to do is learn the forms of lichen. And you probably heard of these in elementary school. You have fruticose, which is a lichen that's cortex. So this chocolate cookie part is actually surrounding the entire body. So the hyphae and the algal partner are going to be enclosed within that. A lot of the fruticose are branchy, thready. Usneas are a common lichen genus that we have. Then you have foliose. Okay. Then you have foliose. So foliose is going to be similar to foliage is how I remember it. So that's a leafy lichen. And in this picture, I'm lifting up the foliose lichen. You can separate it from the substrate that it's attached to. So foliose lichen, you can always take apart from the structure that it's on. Your last form is crustose. And that one is embedded in the structure. You can't separate it from a structure. You'll see this on rocks a lot. So this is another example of a foliose. This is a beautiful one up in Alaska. And we have that upper lower cortex. You have a rhizine that is attaching it. It is not a root structure. That bottom structure that you see there is an attachment structure. So one thing that people ask a lot with plants is, are the lichens killing the plants? Because I've got a tree that's covered in lichens. It's not. That little structure is just holding on to a bare surface that it's found. And if that surface stays bare long enough, because maybe that tree has already lost a lot of leaves, then the lichen's gonna make itself a home there. Now, if the lichen cover gets so heavy that it stops all of the leaves underneath it from photosynthesizing, then you might have an issue. But the lichen itself is not harming any tree or plant that it's on. Fruticose. And this is the structure that is, it's going to be more circular, like a tube with the cortex all the way around. And crustose is when you take this Oreo and you remove, I don't think I can do it the right way, but if you could remove one side, then the hyphae are attached directly into the surface. But lichens like to be complicated. So we have lichen subforms. Squamulous. Squamulous are actually similar. Well, British soldiers are an example of a squamulous lichen. So they have the layered lichen at the bottom, and then they have the podicia, which has the little red caps on it. So squamulous are usually two-part lichens with the leafy, lettucey part at the bottom and then the top. Then you have leprous. Leprous just look like powder, and they come in a lot of colors, like bright neon yellow or green or orange. You can even wonder if they're spray paint on a rock because they're so incredibly bright. And leprous are kind of like one of the most evolved life forms because they don't even need to reproduce. They are the fungi and the photobiont just all in a ball, and they just like break off and become, they're already there. They don't even have to do anything. And then you have umbilicate, which is a subform of foliose lichen. Umbilicate has one holdfast in the center, and that would be similar to rock tripe, or that would be rock tripe. Step 3, pay attention to the colors. So look at these colors of lichens. That is one of you. So you've got to look at the form. You've got to look at the colors. not just the top color, but the undercolor. So you always lift up those foliose lichens and pay attention to what color it is underneath, because that's going to be part of your identifying information. And lichens come in a lot of crazy colors. And that's partly because of these metabolites that are helping them when they are protecting themselves from sun. So some of the most bright colored lichens you'll see are going to be on sunny rocks where that temperature gets up really high. So that's kind of a sunscreen that they make. Learn the reproductive structures. So this reproductive structure here is called apothecia, and they look like little jam tarts just spread all over the top of a lichen. And in each of those little jam tarts are the spores that will need to be released for the next generation. And as these spores are released, they're going to land somewhere, and if they're lucky, their algal partner is going to be nearby, or their photobiont. And if that algal partner is nearby, then they've got it. They are able to start new. What's really interesting about the reproduction of, or the use of these photobionts, is that if you go up in elevation, so if you start at the bottom of the mountain, and for every 500 meters you go up, the same lichen might have a different photobiont, a different algal partner. So kind of tells me that these fungi are really bent on survival. They're going to do whatever it takes. They're generalists. Just give them a good algae, they'll make it work. This is a really cool reproductive structure in the center here. These are called liralae. And this is a graphis lichen. So it's a crusty lichen you typically find on smooth bark trees like maple trees. And it looks like someone has written hieroglyphics into the tree. And those hieroglyphics are actually the reproductive structure of that lichen. And then I'm sure you've seen these little discs that look like they're a Dr. Seuss, a little illustration from Dr. Seuss. Those are apothecia on a fruticose lichen. And finally, get out the chemicals. So this is when you've done everything else, you've got it to genus, or maybe you haven't quite got it to genus yet. You're going to get out the chemicals. So I just brought a couple. I keep a scraper knife, really sharp edge. You barely scrape just a little bit of the cortex off, so you can get to that algal partner, and you drop, this is chlorine. You can also use potassium hydroxide and a couple other chemicals, and you put a drop on there, and how it reacts is going to tell you which species it is. So when you're looking in a guidebook, I don't know if this one is good. And my favorite, which, lichens in North America, this is one you might not want to take in the field with you, because this weighs 7.3 pounds. This is very expensive, but this has everything you need. So this is when, if you know the lichen that you're looking at, you collect it and you bring it home, and this will tell you Medulla pale yellow will test positive with potassium hydroxide. So it will let you know what color to look for when you test it with the chemical to tell you which one it is. So as you can see, identifying lichens can be really tricky. The fluorescence can help you identify a lichen. Certain lichens only fluoresce orange, certain lichens only fluoresce purple. So getting it to genus is pretty good. So what good are lichens? I mean, they're beautiful, they're wonderful, they are hard to identify. Why do we even study them? Well, nitrogen fixation. About 50% of the nitrogen in our soil is fixed by these lichens. And it happens in a couple of ways. Lichens are absorbent, so they absorb everything in the air around them. They absorb whatever minerals or chemicals are in the air, which is a great way to get nitrogen. So they hold it in their thallus, or their structure, and as they're holding it there, if the lichen falls apart and dies, then it becomes part of the soil, releasing that nitrogen. Or one of the really cool ways for lichens to release the nitrogen is through snails. Snails and slugs go along the lichens and they herbivorate it, I guess you call, I guess it's, no, they're eating the fungi. So they eat the lichens, and then they do what we all do after we eat. They release their waste, and their waste is full of rich nitrogen from these lichens. So and you'll notice that when you walk an old road or a new road, a newly scraped road, and you've got these banks beside you, that's a great place to find certain species of lichens, because the soil is so poor and the lichens don't need nitrogen like the other plants need nitrogen. They're getting it from the air. They don't need it from the soil. So they colonize that open surface. Remember, they're just waiting for somewhere to land. They find that bare spot and they start colonizing. They're a great food source. Although I did hear this one sad story about these caribou or reindeer, these are reindeer, eating the lichens in the tundra. It's 50% of their diet. However, since lichens are so absorbent, they can absorb pollution. And one of the pollutants that is showing up in these lichens in the tundra, and it's showing up in humans because the reindeer are eating the lichens, humans are eating the reindeer, and we're getting bioaccumulation of chemicals like strontium that come from the nuclear warfare that has happened in the past. So they're holding these terrible chemicals that we're releasing and then being eaten by animals. But they are a great food source, not only for reindeer, for slugs, they're also habitat. Going back to these tiny worlds, when I take my loupe and I look closely at a lichen, I see mites, I see spiders, I see slugs, I see teeny tiny springtails, and I have, even with my students at school, been able to coerce a couple tardigrades or water bears out of lichens. So they make habitat for who knows what that I haven't seen. Lichens make great nesting materials. So lots of birds use the lichens to help build their nests or line their nests. And that's perfect because lichens have really powerful antibacterial properties. So if you've got a nest full of young ones who can't fly and they're using the bathroom all the time, this is a great way to kind of keep your nest clean and keep the bacteria levels down. Lichens are bioindicators. So lichens can tell us a lot about what's going on our planet. Not all lichens are sensitive to pollution. There are lichens you will find on pavement, on sidewalks in cities. They're everywhere, remember, but some of them are. Some of them are super sensitive to what's in the air. Lobaria pulmonaria is a perfect example. It was believed during the time of the doctrine of signatures, since it looked like a lung, it could help you with lung ailments. Lobaria pulmonaria is an excellent air quality indicator. And in the Smokies, they're using a lot of lichens to help determine levels of different pollutants in the air. And some of these species are so sensitive that they're so slow growing that the amount of pollution that we put in the air versus the amount they can handle may be getting out of balance. So it's really important for us to pay attention to what lichens are telling us. Now, if we're humans, we're saying, how can we use this? How can we use this? So lichens are a commodity. They've been used in dyes and perfumes, in beer, in brewing. You can actually distill lichens into an alcohol. Litmus, deodorant, because of the antibacterial properties. But for lichens good, they are really hard to harvest because they're so slow growing, and because they're not we can't get them, farm them in massive quantities. They're never going to be a super overused commodity for us. It's just too hard. There is an oak moss lichen that is used in Europe for a perfume, and it seems to be abundant, but overall, we're not going out there and farming lichens for much of anything. Lichens are medicinal. Now, this is the magic that I can't wait to see what science can do with, because as we learn more about DNA, we're going to be able to really dig deep into the metabolites, these magic metabolites that lichens have that make them so powerful. Lichens are antibacterial. They have a very strong antibacterial component. Lichens like Usnea, you can make into a salve and apply to an open wound, and they're going to be one of your best defenses. They're antiviral, antifungal, antiparasitic, anti-inflammatory, anti-tumor. Oh, need to go back. So all of these qualities are being studied. They've found that the metabolites in lichens can actually slow tumor growth and slow cell growth. And all of these things are going to be things that we hopefully will see the benefits. The research papers, when you start to look this up, you will find research papers from some of the most renowned medical institutes. So the research is happening. They've just got to be able to find a way to get these. Remember, we can't mass produce them, so they're going to have to copy the metabolites that they're finding that they can only find in lichens and no other organism. One of the really cool uses of lichens is lichenometry. This is easy, inexpensive. If you know the growth rate of a particular species of lichen, and you know when a structure was put in place, or you can find information, even a rock face, you can look at the growth. Lichens grow in a round pattern. So they grow outward always. And as they're growing outward, their spread, that's where their newest growth is. So you can go to that center point and measure out. Some lichens grow, like Rhizocarpum geographicum, grow 1 micron a year. Now, 1 micron is 1/1,000,000th of a meter. Our blood cells are bigger than a micron. So a micron a year is very tiny. So when you see a lichen this big, that lichen, depending on species, some species can grow a foot a year, but a lot of lichen species are slow growing. So when you see one the size of a dinner plate, that may have been there for thousands of years or 1,000 years. So using lichens is one way that you can measure time to see how long. And lichenometry is really popular in Europe, where the country has been there for a very long time, and you have gravestones that have been there for a very long time. Most of all, for me, one of the best uses of lichens are just opening my eyes to paying attention to the wonders around me. It's another way for me to notice all the magic that's happening in nature. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time to be here tonight and to enjoy lichens with me. I do have several species of lichens back here for you to take a look at. I have my white flashlight. With that, if you want to take one out in the dark, I've got a few set aside that are really good fluorescent lichens. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Do you use fluorescence in identification?
You can, yes. And this nice big book here will let you know what the company can expect if the lichen is fluorescent. Yes.
So what name would you use?
I've thought about that a lot. I would have to see it. I would definitely have to see it. I'd have to know the place it was in. So I would probably name it after the place that it was in. Unless I asked me to take a wonderful teacher to it. Did you have a question, Carson?
The structure of the mycelium, as part of the fungal structure, is the function of it. Is it carrying things? Is it holding together?
It is to get food. So the fungi can't make their own food. So they are always using their hyphae to find a way to get food. So
it conducts nutrients from one part of the organism.
yep, that's exactly what it's doing.
So the only concept of lichen is you have a fungus and you have a mouse. And a few years ago, here, this bacteria, the blue green algae. So the anaerobic structure, there's a fungus, there's a proteus, and there's also bacteria.
Yes.
Three.
Three. Yeah, and two different types of fungi in most
They're
lichens.
supposed to have two types of fungi.
Yeah, they're finding basidiomycetes and ascomycetes. Most lichens are ascomycete. Well, pretty much all of them are ascomycetes is their main structure.
And so that I can get this straight in my head, so we have a fungus, and then you could either have an algae, and that might be one. You have a fungus that could also be associated with a bacteria. And then you could have a fungus that would be associated with both of those things. So you have all these different things floating around that are now like.
Yes, and think about that fungi. That fungi has one goal in mind, to feed itself. And so it is out there. It just gives me an even higher respect for fungi. It's out there saying, how can I survive? How can I get food to come to me where I don't even have to go get the food, just have the food here ready for me. So one illustration is that the fungi is the house and the algal or photobiont partner is the bacon. Bringing home the bacon. Okay.
This asks, will the UV flashlight make lichens fluoresce?
Yes. Absolutely. Not all lichens though, only lichens that have that fluorescent. And typically you'll see those on cement surface trees or rocks. So think about that. Probably this fluorescence has a lot to do with its need to protect itself from sunlight.
Keith asks, where was the current slide's photo taken? And what was the lichen on the nitrogen fixation slide?
This was taken up in the coast of Maine. In the nitrogen fixation slide. In particular, it was very much the same species through most of the coast. Nitrogen fixation. I was in Pickens County.
Oh,
That was over near Big Rock Mountain.
cool. And one more from Zoom. Catherine asked, what was the name of the man who is the lichen authority who was the former construction worker?
Kerry Knudsen. So Kerry Knudsen. Kerry Knudsen.
Other questions out there in the live audience?
Yeah.
Say that, how to lichen eat.
They eat the algal. Well, technically, they kind of do produce their own food, but they capture their food. So the algal, the photobiont is their food. The algal or cyanobacteria partner.
How in the world did you get interested in something so detailed?
Well, they're weird, and I like weird things. That's number one. Number two, actually, Kay and I took a class. How long ago was that? 4 or 5. Was that all? It feels like I've been swimming in lichens. Yeah, about 4 or 5 years ago, we took a class up at Alarka Institute, and I already was interested and thought they were cool, and I was fascinated, but then I was sold. Then I was like, I want to know everything there is to know. And that has not happened yet, because remember, I'm not an expert, but I'm working on it. Seth.
In terms of technical, how would that respond to infrared light
I don't know the answer to that question.
or UV?
UV, it would depend on, I mean, at night they fluoresce, but I don't know how you use UV in photography. So it's kind of hard. Yeah. Yeah, kind of hard to.
Keith, the one with the nitrogen fixation for Keith, he didn't get the species on that slide.
Oh, the species. I thought he wanted the location. This is called a pink earth lichen is the common name.
Okay, yeah, you did say it was for.
Yes.
So for the ones that fluoresce, are they only the kind that look like powder? Or
No. No, so this stick that I brought that has this ruffled lichen on it, this ruffled lichen fluoresces in purple. And then I have some rhododendron branches Crustos, folios, and, I don't know about fruticose, but crustos and folios are the two structures, and, left crust I've seen. So that is the crusty one. I've seen all of those fluoresce.
Do the lichens fluoresce when they're dry or just when they're wet?
They'll fluoresce all the time, but their best fluorescence is when they've been photosynthesizing or producing food. So if you go out on a night that there's moisture in the air and there's been a little bit of light during the day, you'll find that they're fluorescing, but they're always fluorescing. I've always been able to find them. But these, for instance, when I first brought them in, they had a high fluorescent. I did this in school today with my students. So we brought them in from our morning walk and we went in the closet and we looked at them with the UV light. And then I went back later this afternoon and looked at them again, and they had dried to make sure I had the right sticks, and they had dried. So they weren't fluorescing as brightly, but they were still fluorescing.
Do they glow bright enough that it would turn out lights and something so that are they that bright, or is it you have to go in?
Possibly some of them fluoresce really. Now I maybe would spray them a little bit. Some of them fluoresce really, really brightly. We went out in our yard the other night and some of the rocks we shined the UV light on and they were just this bright, bright orange. So
turn off the lights right now.
yeah, we can try it. Okay.
So do you have to have the UV light?
Yes, you have to have a UV light.
Okay.
We'll try this one. No pressure, lichens.
Yeah.
Is that long way or short?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to see. This has got, if anyone wants to come play with this, there's another nice bright orange one.
I feel like I've seen some that like just kind of glow on their own.
Yeah, one of these, this one almost seems that way. But they don't bioluminesce, which is having that ability to make their own light. It's a fluorescent, so it's a reflective thing. Any more questions? Yeah.
So is that fluorescent light, is it long light or short light?
I'm not sure. This is,
I'm a light, and so we have long light and short light lights and minerals.
yeah.
I appear different.
Yeah, I can't answer that question, but I would like to learn more about that. I would like to learn, maybe if I have one of each, I might see different fluorescences. That would be really cool.
And one might be very dramatic, that's what happens in minerals.
Yeah.
Come in, and then you turn on the short light. Yeah.
Well, I have something to go look up. See if I can get another flashlight.
So how much,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, how much time do you spend nerding out in the woods on lichens, like on average each week?
Well, right now, let me just tell you, October, Friday the 13th, parent teacher conferences, Halloween on a school day. I don't have much time right now. I would like to have a lot more time nerding out in the woods. Every chance I get, I am nerding out in the woods, but I don't have as much time to do that as I would like, for sure. And there is like hours more that I could tell you about lichens. I'm filing through my head all the things I haven't told you. So there's so much more to learn. And then I still only have a very small seed bank of knowledge myself about lichens. So
Have you managed to contaminate any of your students with this, lichen?
Yeah, every year I try. This morning I was picking up the lichens to collect, to check them, and the rest of the day I had students bringing me lichens. So I try really hard. Yes.
I don't suppose there's an identifying map, like there's plants and birds and all that.
Well, I found recently that, not that I know of, if there is, somebody tell me.
That would be fun.
Well, and it's gonna be like, if you've ever used Seek to try to identify a fungi, for example. If Seek can't see the gills, can't see the tree that it's growing on, all the things that are important to know about identifying fungi, Seek will just tell you, that's my seed, or this will get my seed. It'll stop there. Or gilled mushroom. It won't go in further detail. Lichens would be even worse. An algorithm would be completely thrown off because there are so many parts to identifying a lichen, so many layers of knowing which reproductive structure does it have. So then it has to be displaying its reproductive structures at that time, knowing what form it is. And even some of the forms are just so incredibly similar. So it would be really hard, but I did find in the UK Natural History Museum has a lichen identification page, and I got really excited about it. And then I realized they have very few lichens on there, but they open the page up with Prestos folios fruticus, and you click on that. And then when you click on that one, it gives you another key to go through checking parts of the structures. But there's only a handful of lichens on there, so, and it's in the UK, so it's not super useful yet, but I hope that an app like that could get developed. That'd be really cool if a young person, because even if you can just get it to change by putting in some of those structures. I mean, it'd be even better if it had with the chemical testing in there, and you were skilled enough and a lot of lichens though need an electron microscope even to identify them. So it is, again, this is an area where you can relax because you're probably not going to identify it to species.
One person who asked, do you have a lichen garden at home?
I think it would be really hard to. All you have to do though is put some rocks in your yard and wait maybe a couple 100 years. I think I have a lot of trees in my yard that have lichen and a lot of rocks, and I leave them. I don't take them down. There are people who think they should remove the lichens because they're worried about their trees or whatever. But I'm not sure you can cultivate lichens. It's a good question. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Yes. You're ready. Yeah, my students, I don't know, I use a lot of medical stuff, like humanity and survival exchange. And we need each other. And how everything is done. Get closer to the next year.